Thank you, Al.
Well, we're here again.
Yeah, here we are again. 2023.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about your adventures with finding the Urantia Book and with being a musician as a younger man, and also just about your life and your artisanship.
Yeah. Well, there was a time in my life I didn't think I'd be doing anything else but music. That was the center of my life, and ultimately it did lead to finding the Urantia Book. The group that I was in at the time, Psalms, was dedicated to playing music with a message. So we had the right attitude. There was a lot of music out there, and we were doing cover music, but we would select Earth, Wind, and Fire, and some of the other pieces that had a message to it. Then the band started to become more advanced in creating our own music, and a musician came to join us, guitar player Eugene Patricella. And he had been in Hawaii, and interesting enough, I found out later that the group that he was over there seeing, was attached and everything, and he found a book laying on the table, and so he wound up bringing the book back with him, and I didn't know about it until we would sit in the evenings. He stayed with me for a few weeks before we went out on the road, and we would sit around. He played guitar, so he would do 12-string guitar, and I was using my alto flute, and we would just jam and creating music, and and our conversations were very, they were kind of deep and heavy. I'd go there in a second, So I guess he felt that, wow, this is a person that might really get this, So one evening he handed me this big blue book, and he said, "Hey, check this out." And I said, "Okay." And I went across the room and I opened it up, and it opened up right to the thought adjuster pages. That must have been the place where my thought adjuster said, "This is where you need to start."
Wow.
And it made an immediate connection. I mean, it was instantaneous, and it came full circle at that time, because I'd had a dream or vision. I'd say dream, but it wasn't like usual dreaming. But it wasn't like I was like awake and seeing things. And it said, you're going to receive a book.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was going to be about everything.
Wow.
And I hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. It was just one of those kind of weird things. But when I opened that book that day, the Urantia Book, it all came full circle.
Wow.
And it hit me at that point. That was the impact, because not only was the material right to the point, it was the fact that I had that vision that I would receive this book,
Wow.
And it was instantaneous, and I read voraciously for days. I mean, I couldn't put it down. And during that time, being a musician, unless you were rehearsing, you had plenty of free time. And then our discussions between Eugene and I became very, I had questions, and.
Was he a lifelong musician?
Yeah.
Is he still alive?
He's, as far as I know, I haven't seen him in years, but Eugene had he was unique in the sense that he was a visionary and stuff, and he was on the front end of the internet coming in. He was one of those people that got one of the the spaces on the internet, his own space, and he encrypted it with now you see 128 encryption. He had 400 encryption chips and stuff, and he, because he had that, companies came to him like GE and Lockheed and
wow.
To get space on the internet, because it was becoming crowded with everybody on there, and they had top secret stuff and all kinds of stuff.
Wow. So he also kind of went into other into technology.
Yeah, and because he was like that, we would come home. When I say home, at that point in the band, we had a big farmhouse and down in Princeton, and we kind of like the band guys lived there.
Is that outside in New York?
New Jersey, Princeton,
New Jersey, okay.
right outside the university, because we used to play at Princeton University all the time.
Uh-huh.
We used to throw impromptu concerts there, where we call playing naturally. We would just come there and with no idea what we were going to play and just start playing.
Wow.
Yeah, and we were always in sync. And
wow.
So we would come in and all our equipment would be gone. And Eugene would have traded it all out for upgrade for the latest in technology, and
wow,
and he just had that knack. So at that time, he had that, and he formed the company because they started coming to him, and he was one of those Bergenstock undershirt, kind of nondescript hair, beard. He had like a Jesus beard kind of thing, hair, long hair, and. That's how he went to the board meetings, and he used to.
So he was both a musician even back in those days. Wow.
Yeah, and it was mostly the music because he only got he asked the phone company. He wanted a T1 line. He was living in Trenton at the time, and he wanted a T1 line right into his house. I mean, that's companies get that.
Yeah.
And he just had a little apartment. he had in 2 weeks they had a T1 line into him.
Wow.
And so he stored a lot of their stuff. They came onto his, because he was fully encrypted and everything.
Wow.
And they were paying him, at the time I heard, it was somewhere around like $250,000 a week and stuff like that. Yeah, so, but he wasn't a materialistic person, He kind of like wanted his own space. And
wow.
I remember seeing books, all kind of manuals stacked in the corner, all their stuff, GU and stuff.
And does he still read the Urantia Book?
Well, yeah, he was an actor. He was lifelong, but most of his focus was music.
Yeah.
And he wanted the T1 line so he can play online with no interruption. He could play with people around the world, because he was pushing, heavy space and stuff on the internet.
Wow, and this was before the internet was so big.
That's right. It was, and so.
And what year did you guys find the Urantia Book?
I found the Urantia Book I met him in 1972.
Wow.
And he had joined the band.
So you guys were close for a lot of years.
Yeah. We lived together. We talked, and we always discussed the book, and then there were a lot of people that would come to our place and to get their dose of the book, because that's all we did. We played music and we read the book and talked about it. That's I guess what you might call the first study group, and it was pretty good.
Yeah, and then you guys would just play a lot of gigs and just live the life of jazz musicians.
Yeah, at that point we had we got a contract with Arista Records because we had a producer. We were the band for Larry Young. He was named Khalid, and he was always like the number 2 jazz organist under Jimmy Smith. But all the musicians came out to hear Larry play because he was innovative. He was playing outside the room and everything.
Yeah. And
that was during the time that Donald Byrd had the Blackbirds and Maurice White had the Earth, Wind and Fire. All these jazz guys were surrounding themselves with this young talent, and so the producer put us with Larry Young, and we were doing concerts around with him. And I think I might have mentioned before the infamous jail or prison concert we did with him, and which pretty much I think at that time ended our relationship with him in terms of playing, because it had gotten to be, he was a genius, but he had no kind of filters or anything, and so he would just go and there was a story that he went to someone's home and just broke into the home. They had a big grand piano, and they called the police. He's there on the piano just playing. Wow. And they sent him up to the I think it was his name, Greystone or whatever the place was where they and they said there's nothing wrong with him, and they just let him go and everything. And so
because he hadn't really done anything other
hadn't
than
done anything. And they found he was like really just a harmless guy, and the people didn't press any charges or anything.
Wow.
But he felt that that he was blessed with some kind of gift, and we were part of it because he could just play, and then we can just just come in and play and be right with the song, and he'd hear us with him, and then he'll go over here, and he would just amuse himself with what he could do, moving around, and all the music would follow him.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna scooch this back. It's fun to see your, yeah, and do you think it's could you share the prison story?
That was interesting. They were shooting a documentary, and so we were his band, of course, and Larry had a group of sycophants, guys that hung around him all the time. You know, we didn't really participate in that aspect. We were there.
They were like his little entourage.
Yes, and so when we got to the prison, you know, they search you going in. Larry had just come off tour with Santana McLaughlin. He played with the Mahavishnu group. He's on a couple of Miles Davis, you know, and stuff. And he was a player out there, and everybody knew him, you know. So he had just come off that tour, and he had taken about $10,000 of the money he got paid and bought some pure THC. And so he had this. He dressed in African garb, big robes, Arab garb, because he taught Arabic at the mosque and everything, because he spoke fluent Arabic and everything. And so he had this leather pouch, and it was filled with the THC. And so when they searched everybody coming in, you know, and that's why another thing, he thought he could be invisible anytime he needed to. And it was kind of weird, because I was coming in, and at that time I played 5 horns at the baritone, so I'm coming in with all these horns and everything. So they just, okay, you can go in. I was the target, you know. Let's check all these horns and everything, and he just went in. And one of the things that happened in the prison was that when they brought all the prisoners to the auditorium, they kept the temperature up like almost in the 90s. It was. I mean, they said that they increased the heat so that they'll be like lethargic, and it keeps down on, you know, arguments and stuff like that. And so they said, well, only thing that we can do for you is to, you know, give you these pitchers of, you know, ice water. You know, and they brought out a tray with had 4 or 5 pitchers of water and glasses and everything. And out the corner of my eye, I see Larry pouring THC into pitchers. You know, and it didn't occur to me. I saw it, but then when we started drinking the water, I mean, immediately things started happening. You know, I looked at Eugene; he's playing, and I look at him, and I see that glare in his eyes, that kind of like THC look. And Jimmy, the drummer, he was just playing, and Larry started going out on the front of the stage. He stopped playing and talking to the prisoners, telling them not to be punks and all kind of stuff. And he was preaching. He was speaking Arabic and then English. And his sycophants, you know, Eugene I knew could handle it, and so would Jimmy and myself. You know, you know when you're outside of your thing and you just kind of like control it. But his sycophants, they had no idea, and they just went berserk, bringing the guards out to take them off stage, and they were doing karate and stuff, and they just was all over the stage, and that's when the guard said, you know, we let you in here, but we don't have to let you out, you know. But what happened was, when we were going in, I heard someone call my name out. He said, "Al, Al," and it was the brother of a close friend of mine. I said, "What are you doing here? You know, in jail?" And he's going, "Well, you know, man, you know." And so he said, "Get me high, Al, get me high. What's going on?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, everybody's drinking that stuff," and the prisoners rushed the stage. I mean, this set off a chain of events. They rushed the stage. His guys are going crazy on the stage doing karate, and we're playing away, just playing music, and Larry's out in the front just preaching all this stuff. And I mean, it was like a movie, a bad movie. And so that ended our concert, and somewhere that's on film. I don't know who has it, but somewhere that's on film somewhere, you know. And
what prison was it?
It was Essex County. You know, it wasn't one of those like maximum securities. It was the local county jail. Like, you know, that's the first place you go, and then you know. So
But the guards eventually said, "Okay, you got to get out of here."
yeah, we had to get out of there. And I remember that night too, because in my mind I said, "Wow, it's a full moon too," you know.
I think you said that he also read the Urantia book.
He did, in a sense, he did, but it was just among the many books that he read,
Yeah.
But he did.
Yeah.
He had to know where we were coming from and everything, and
Yeah.
and a couple times he had talked to me about it. He said he just mixed it in with everything else, and
Yeah. It could be that way with some. Yeah, I guess a lot of people do that, and then, but yeah, still they might still study it, still get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
Did you ever know Billy Eckstein or his? Anyway, I heard that his son was a reader.
There were so many people that I discovered later on. Santana.
Yeah.
Who was that with the? What's the name of that group? There was so many people.
Yeah, and in jazz, Sun Ra.
Yeah, because we used to go to see
Coleman.
Sun Ra, Ornette Coleman. We used to go and see Sun Ra, and that was the reason for his music.
The Urantia book, you think?
Yeah, probably. Because it stretches you.
Wow.
Look at Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah.
I mean, he came up with the whole Star Trek series.
Yeah, that's what people. Yeah, I've researched that and written about it. Yeah, I do think that he did. It does seem like he did read it some. Get some inspiration from it.
He pulled the prime directive out of it.
Yeah.
And all the various beings and different planets and everything.
Yeah. Sort of the Federation and.
Mm-hmm. And the prime directive is what we found in the Urantia book. Like, there's student travelers that come here and observe the planet and everything.
Yeah.
But they seem to know not to interfere. You don't give them anything that upsets the evolution of things. You don't give them something so advanced that they can't handle it and haven't evolved the intelligence or the ability to not use it dangerously. So,
yeah. Were there any other musicians that did you find any other musicians that got into it? Or was it kind of like you just talked about it with a lot of people, a lot of friends?
Yeah, just talk. As a matter of fact, when I first started reading, I was on fire.
Yeah.
And the first thing I wanted to do was go to all my friends. I said, "You got to read this, man. This is here." And the joke was, "Okay, here comes Al with that blue book."
Wow.
So the only ones that came out of that was one of my close friends, Johnny. He was my first friend. We were friends at 5 years old, and to this day, he's still a reader.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's not an activist, but he reads and he sends me stuff. And he's a poet and our DJ. He was a Marine and he had got wounded in Quezon and came back, and he came back with his head together and everything, And I guess that was part of it. That he kept his head together in Vietnam and everything.
Wow.
And my brother and my father were among the first people that became readers.
Wow.
And those two, my father said he had been waiting all his life for that.
Wow.
And my brother, both of them are gone, and they were the two closest men to me in my life.
Wow.
But it did a lot to me to have them to accept the book and read it and know about it. I used to sit and read for my father because he was intelligent, but his upbringing in Georgia and everything, he wasn't like, the Urantia book is, especially the first 2 or 3 sections, or you have to have some
vocabulary.
Vocabulary, that's right. So I would sit and read to him.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and but he was reading it on his own. He especially the Jesus paper, because he was a deacon in the church. And,
wow.
And that made him probably one of the most powerful deacons, because the young ones would come to him and ask him advice and stuff. So it had its effect even on him. At that stage, and that was kind of cool.
What kind of church was he in?
A Baptist church.
Wow.
Yeah.
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey, yeah.
Wow.
But my father was a talker, and he was a person that had personality, and he, for a lot of part of his life, he was a cab driver, and he would come home and tell us about the people that he had in his cab, and especially the successful ones and what they did and everything. And
cool.
And he was responsible for me being able to handle myself and become, intellectual and be able to be accepted in any group. He used to have me and my brother stand in front of him, and he would say, "Okay, explain yourself to me," And he didn't like, a lot of hand movement and shuffling around. He said, "Stand up straight." That's probably the military part of it. Because he was in the military, and to look a person straight in the eye, and when you shake their hands, and all those kind of nuances.
Yeah.
And on Sundays, he used to drive us out to the suburbs, because we were living in the projects in Newark, And he would let us see that people lived in houses, had their own houses and stuff. And we were just, on Sundays, just looking at people's houses. And he put that in us, and the whole thing of visualizing what you want in life,
Yeah.
And it paid big dividends, because I've owned, a lot of massive homes and stuff.
Wow.
And my sons now, that's what they are. I mean, it started with my father to me, and then my sons, they grew up in homes that were in neighborhoods that were, most of the time, they were the only blacks in the school, and but all their friends and our friends from work and everything with a mixed variety, a lot of and so their friends were, to this day, they still have those same friends.
Wow.
My son, as a matter of fact, he just visited one of them, who has he used to live across the street, and they just spend the night over there all the time. We were in a really nice neighborhood at that time, and 2-acre lots, the whole thing. But he now has a $1.5 million, 10,000 square foot home,
Wow.
and he's a broker or something in stock, and so I know how that process works. And it's the same process as I talked today about race. Each race has the responsibility of building within itself and pushing its geniuses and pushing its people out and getting the best product that comes, for the blending and everything, and getting rid of, and not allowing the degenerate. And I use that term not from a negative standpoint, but from a standpoint of that each race has some genetic errors and stuff, and they say we are overly compassionate, that we say, oh yeah, it's freedom, let them, you don't let them reproduce. And you hear a lot of people say they have a child that has special needs, and they'll get their tubes tied or something, so that they can't reproduce, and so each race has that kind of responsibility. And so I see how that process, in terms of education and everything, I made sure that they were educated. I participated in all the sports with them and everything.
Yeah.
And it paid off to I have grandsons that now that are very talented.
Wow.
Advanced class violinists and all kinds of stuff.
And how long, when did you switch over from being a professional musician to, then you became an educator, right? Yeah,
well, what happened was that I met my wife, and my days of traveling. We were set to, with Arista Records, we were set to release our album. We couldn't do our own concerts until waiting for the release date, and we had taken the pictures for the album cover. We were the next thing after Earth, Wind and Fire.
Wow.
The look of the band, it was multicultural. We had a Nauj from Mexico, handlebar muscle gas guitar player, Eugene Patricella, David.
Was Eugene white then?
Yeah, he was Italian.
Yeah,
he was Italian.
So it's very very multicultural.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And we had Tony Bazzucchio. He was Italian, and so the look of the band, it was a great band, and we had a prodigy on bass, Dave Eubanks, and just out of Arts High, and he was really good, and we were ready, but the producer that we had was trying to make a deal for all these other groups, and things got delayed, and I went away. I was finishing up I went and said, well, I might as well go and finish up my degree, and went back to school at Rutgers and formed a little jazz band that was playing around town with some musicians. And then I met my wife. My brother was living in Memphis at the time. He was working at the Harvard. And he says, yeah, why don't you come down to visit? And I said, yeah, why don't you set up some ladies for me to swing? And so she wasn't one of the ones that he set up for me, He says, "Oh yeah, this is one in my office. I told her I'd bring you by. She's kind of crazy, you know." And that's the one I wound up. 6 months later, we were getting married.
Wow.
And music then became my hobby as opposed to, what my direction. Because she said, you got to get me into a house.
Uh-huh.
I was living in a little apartment and everything.
Yeah.
I was working as a resident director at the Y, and so I had to come up with bigger and better things. And so I found that's when I found a business. That's when I started really getting into business and reading and about self-improvement. I became an Amway distributor. I went to this supposed to be an interview, but it was an Amway presentation. And she says, "What kind of job in the evening?" But I came back and we moved very quickly and built an organization and bought our first house in 3 months. And
wow.
And then our second. By the time we got to our second home, with the in-ground pool and everything, people started like saying, "Yeah, we're working for you," but I was really working hard then.
Yeah.
But I wasn't so much into the product as I was into reading How to Think and Grow Rich and Norman Vincent Peale and all the various, all the minds that were that had that kind of things in selling, because it was really about the idea, and which probably helped me a lot in terms of my approach to the Urantia book, because just having the enthusiasm, people want to read that. And so then she was saying, "Well, why don't you go into insurance?" She was in insurance. She was an underwriter when I met her. So I went to school and got some and became a claims adjuster. Went to and got an insurance, but it wasn't for me, And so I moved around and created some businesses and stuff, and created some very successful businesses. But I learned to sell. First thing I learned to sell was cars, because my car broke down in front of a Saab dealership, a little Toyota, beat up Toyota, and they happened to be looking for a salesman, and they gave me a brand new Saab.
Wow.
So I started selling Saabs, and I became very good. I was like third in the nation on a poll in terms of numbers of Saabs I sold in a month and everything. And then I went there selling BMWs, and next thing I know, then life just moved me along, and I started to. By that time, I had been reading. I'd been reading and this was in the '80s and stuff, and I started to recognize how things worked in terms as you get in tune with your thought adjuster and you get in tune with the flow, and I started to recognize things and the patterns and everything, and so I was confident in all the moves, and that's kind of hard when you're with someone that. My wife used to say, "You were in that blue book," and she kind of put a whole negative thing on it. And to this day, my sons aren't enthusiastic about it because how their mom was so negative about it. But I see my journey from the time I found the book to where I am today, and it was predicted. And I tell my story in the how I found the Urantia book, but I talked about my great aunt, and when I was born, because my mother had she had 3 sisters, but 2 stayed in Georgia, and was raised by their aunt and Reverend Calhoun, who was the most known minister in Macon at the time, and he had died a couple months before the boys were born, and supposedly my great aunt. Said that he came into the room and he put a crown on the base of one of the cribs and said, "This one's going to be special." And so for a long time they said she said it was me, but as time went on, my other cousin went on and became this minister, Dr. Aaron Jones, and everything, and said no, it must not have been Al, but they didn't know it was really me, because he was. He was kind of sketchy in that whole ministry thing, But that that was what. But it was through that dream that always was in the back of my mind, and I kind of like understood it at that time, and because when they say you're special, usually you become some big time minister and everything, and but that wasn't mine. I was more of a teacher, and but that became a central part of my journey on it, and I'm here now, and I've done so many different things, and moved along the path that the one thing that stuck though was the music.
Uh-huh.
And so when I started working as an instructional designer at UPS, my boss at Christmas time, I would bring my flute and play at the company Christmas party and everything. So he asked me, he says, "Do you think you can create music for us for the training?" Because we had now moved into the internet.
Yeah.
This was in the early '90s, and they moved from a DOS-based system to, CBTs, computer-based training and everything, and being able to put stuff on the internet. And so I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And he says, "Well, tell me what you need." That's when I bought my first wind controller.
Yeah.
And I have not played my acoustical instruments since that time.
Yeah.
For 6 months straight, all I did was create music. I wasn't writing training and everything. I was creating music.
Wow.
And people would come and they said, "We want to do this in there. Can you give us this kind of music?" And I said, "Sure." And I'd make music. And when I left there, I left with my wind controller. I left all the software there, but I left to go to BMW. And one of my first assignments was to create 7 training videos with BMW.
Uh-huh.
And I did all the music. I got a letter saying, and he even supplied his own music and saved the budget and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Wow. And the Urantia Book's still an important part of your life.
It is the most important part because I've refined the process, and I tell new readers or read people that have been reading, because they say they're going out trying to get people to read. I said, no, I don't do that anymore. People come to me.
Uh-huh.
Those that are ready, they see the light and they ask the questions, and then the hair goes up when I say, "Whoa, this is one of them. Look at what they're asking me.
Yeah.
And look what their situation," and I'll share it with them, and it's been that way. So I said, if you're living right, they'll come to you, because Jesus had that whole principle of not giving advice unless it was asked for,
Yeah.
And so we all go through this similar life experiences. Some a little bit balanced differently. Some people may be struggling with impatience or tolerance or getting upset or get that whatever thing, family issues. They're all contained in our development.
Yeah.
As we move along and try to become better human beings, and I've had some major lessons and some major breakthroughs, and I got to the point where that if I made the right decision, I could see the path, open up.
Yeah.
And if I and I was aware when I made the wrong decision,
Yeah.
because I'd get corrected.
Wow.
And I've been working on a book called the Spiritual Path, and I talk about the soft boot. I said, I don't have to get the hard boot. You can just give me a little soft and say, "Hey," and I say, "Hey, I got it." But I do know in certain people's lives, we have free will, and free will is nothing more than do you choose God or you don't choose God. We have the will to choose, and in that is where creativity and all the other things are. But it's simple. You either choose God or you don't, and so I choose God. It makes it so much easier, and that doesn't mean that you're exempt from some of the pain and tragedies and stuff of life and suffering, because he said you're going to do that. But you look at it differently. It becomes a training moment, a moment where you can learn from. No looking back or regrets or anything. You're moving forward all the time. Even coming here this time, it was at one point I didn't think I would make it here. For a lot of reasons, financial, all the things that were happening in my life at the time, and I got to a point I said I almost gave in to doubt. I said I don't know. I didn't see it. I didn't see how I could